And I want to say welcome to all of those that are attending and also welcome to our panelists and host. My name is Marsha Olson. I'm the Associate Director for the Center for Community Engagement and Learning at UAA. I am also a faculty member and one of the co-chairs for Democracy and Civic Action Week, and also tech support today. So I'm wearing like a lot of hats. I just want to welcome you to this event, One Small Step, Dialogue Across the Political Divide. And let you know this is a part of Democracy and Civic Action Week. This is actually our last event of Democracy and Civic Action Week. So we saved the best for last. Don't tell everyone else that went. Just like this event, all of our events from this week are available to view. We have recordings up on our Democracy and Civic Action Week website, which I will put in the chat for all of you attending. And this event will also be up there as well in a few hours. I am going to go ahead and turn things over to our host for today, Paola Vancaro, who is a faculty member in our Department of Journalism and Public Communications, and let her take the reins.
Great, thanks, Marsha. I really appreciate your introduction. So we're here today. We're essentially learning about how we can get out of our bubbles, out of our political or sometimes socioeconomic or cultural or friendship bubbles. And this program that StoryCorps established is going to explain how it does that. It's called One Small Step. And we have with us Jacqueline Van Meter from StoryCorps. We have Drew Kaysen from Alaska Public Media. And we have Evan, who is a participant. He had a dialogue with a person on the other side of the political spectrum named Ryan, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but Evan will tell us about his experience. So before we get going, I'd like to briefly acknowledge that we are on Dena'ina Athabascan lands, and that we appreciate the stewardship of those lands over the years and our ability to work and live here. And we also acknowledge the work that that community has done in the past, the present, and in the future. And so with that, I'm going to start with some questions for our panelists today. And the first question I have is if you could just give me an overview about what StoryCorps is and what One Small Step is as a part of StoryCorps.
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. Thank you, Paula. Jacqueline Van Meter here from StoryCorps. The backstory of this organization, we've been around, we're an independent nonprofit. We've been around since 2003. And the premise, the sort of origin story of our work is our founder, a guy named Dave Isay. He's a radio documentarian by trade. And he used to do lots of sort of interesting radio projects specifically focused on capturing stories from people that we don't hear from as often in mainstream media. And he experimented with the format. And one of the things he discovered is rather than interviewing people directly, he would give his subjects microphones and invite them to go back into their communities and record conversations with people from their communities to hear those stories kind of firsthand in relationship. And he discovered that the kinds of conversations and the revelations in those conversations were so powerful. And so he conceived of this idea of StoryCorps, the premise being to invite people to interview someone from their life, someone that they care about, and record the conversation and just tell the stories of their lives. The first incarnation of this was a little booth in Grand Central Station in New York. And the invitation was posed to anyone walking by, hey, who would you like to talk to? Would you like to take a few minutes to interview someone? And the same thing happened. These really remarkable, very intimate and personal conversations were taking place here in the middle of one of the busiest places on earth. And so this was, a couple of decades ago now, but over the years, the idea has been, how can we make the opportunity for two people to interview one another and discover one another and record those conversations available to more folks? There have been different projects over the years. For example, focused on engaging with the military community to document stories of people who've served in the military, to document the stories of people who perhaps lost a loved one in the 9/11 attacks. to document the stories of LGBTQ Americans, Black and African Americans, Latinx Americans. And one of our more recent initiatives is this project, One Small Step. So the premise of One Small Step is we believe very deeply in the power of this conversational model of giving people the opportunity to record these conversations. What then would happen if, rather than bringing two people who know each other together to have these conversations, we bring together two people who don't know each other? What can that conversation hold for them? One Small Step in particular was born out of our looking around in 2016 and seeing how much division there was in the country because of our politics, how polarized we were becoming. And we thought, this model that we have of bringing people together in conversation, perhaps that can play some part in bringing us back together as community members. And so for the last few years, we've experimented with different ways of posing this invitation to Americans of all backgrounds and beliefs to come together, have a conversation with someone that they might not disagree or agree with politically, to see if they can tap into one another's humanity and connect as human beings.
Great. Marcia, do you want to cue up the golden rule video?
So I can maybe say just a quick word about this video. There's two things that can happen after a StoryCorps conversation is recorded. With the participants' permission, the recording is archived in our collection at the Library of Congress. So over the years, we've recorded thousands upon thousands, now over 100,000 conversations that make up this collection. It's actually the largest single collection of human voices ever gathered. And participants also have the opportunity, if they want to give us permission, to potentially share excerpts of their conversations on the radio. So the story that you're about to hear is a little bit unique in that it's two people who are kind of strangers, but they came together in real life, had an experience together, and then they came to StoryCorps to recount that experience of coming together as strangers out in the world, and they tell the story of what happened at StoryCorps.
Great, thank you.
I don't have a title for the golden rule. I don't have a video title. Is there maybe another video title for that?
I don't know. That's what my notes say.
This is what I have.
Right.
Got it. I wonder if you are able to, Marcia, let me be like a presenter momentarily, because I should have that saved locally on my computer.
Yes.
And I might be able to tee that up if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that real quick.
Cool.
There you go.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And we'll play the golden rule. Can everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Great.
Oh, we can't hear it well, though. Yeah, Jacqueline, we can't hear it.
You can't hear it at all?
No.
Well, shucks. Why don't we, perhaps we can continue the conversation and we can
let's just do
share
that
it at the end.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I think that might work well. It's actually a beautiful animation and it tells us a beautiful story, actually. So yeah, I wanted to know, how does StoryCorps find individuals who actually want to break out of their bubble and participate in One Small Step?
Great question. So we've kind of announced the opportunity to participate in a lot of different ways. But what I think is interesting is that StoryCorps, of course, these conversations historically from people who know each other really are best when they, there's trust shared between participants. And so it's really a step out of our comfort zone to invite strangers to come together and try to establish that trust. And so one of the ways that we think it's really important to create an environment of trust is, rather than just knocking on people's doors individually, going to community organizations that already have deep relationships in their community and working with those organizations to get the word out and invite them kind of to the table to have these conversations. And so there are a lot of different ways that we collaborate with community organizations. The program that I run is called One Small Step Communities. We affectionately refer to it as the One Small Step Hubs. And we work with public radio stations across the country, which seem like such a natural fit because, of course, public radio stations, the mission of public media is to really be a community convener, to showcase and uplift the stories of people in the community and help listeners better understand, who they share the community with. And so it was a really natural fit for us to work with radio stations to help get the word out and to record these conversations locally. So, we are now in our third year of collaborating with stations. Each year we work specifically with 6 public radio stations. We sort of train them up on all things One Small Step, and we deputize someone locally to actually facilitate these conversations themselves. And
that's Drew. That's Drew Kaysen.
That's right. That's Drew in the case of here in Alaska.
Great.
So yeah, I guess I can jump in here and talk a little bit about what that has looked like locally. So I am not a normal staff person at Alaska Public Media, and I really appreciate what they do, but it's not my professional background. But they put out the word early in the year that they were looking for someone to do this. And I do a lot of community dialogue type stuff, and I'm really interested in politics, but am more interested in sort of overcoming partisanship than leaning into getting one side victory over the other one. And so I felt like this is a really wonderful fit for sort of my hopes and dreams about what our community can be. Because I've observed a lot of the things that I think the whole program is responding to nationally here at the local level. And so we've put the word out through several local organizations like Alaska Common Ground that sort of come at some of these community questions from a nonpartisan perspective. We put up promos on the public radio station, and then I've also just done some individual direct outreach to people. So I was disappointed that Ryan was unable to be here today. He was excited about participating. Evan and he were our first pair. And it was actually a really beautiful coincidence that I sort of had one person in mind from the time when I'd applied for the job before I knew I was going to be doing the facilitation. As like, oh, here is someone who's very conservative, but who I think a lot of liberals would be surprised to talk to, that he's a very sort of open-minded and reasonable person, despite being so conservative. And the first person who signed up after hearing about it from our promo on our local radio station was Evan, who was somebody I'd gone to high school with and thought highly of also. And so in an effort to sort of warm myself up as a rookie at doing all of this, I picked out those 2 people who I sort of trusted, I thought would have a good conversation, and they really did. I think that Jack Logan can attest to, despite me mentioning every other time I spoke that this was my first time doing it, the conversation went really beautifully. And I think it was because we did a good job of picking a couple people who cared a lot about the community, but were open-minded and wanted to have a conversation more than they wanted to have a fight.
Mm-hmm. And tell me, how was Anchorage chosen to be one of the communities, one of 6 communities in 2021?
So there are a lot of things that we consider when we're trying to build sort of a cohort of stations that will work together over the course of the year. And we're always looking for, where have we not been? Like which region, which community do we need to be hearing more from? And I think in particular with One Small Step, we're interested in, these conversations really are meant to shatter our stereotypes. They're meant to help people understand that it's not as black and white as blue and red and left and right. That's so many people fall somewhere in the middle, and they're this really unique combination of ideologies. And when we looked at the map and thought, where do we need to go? We looked at Alaska and thought, oh, there is an area of the country where I think we can really learn from how these stereotypes are shattered and how one size does not fit all. So we were interested. We know that, I think broadly speaking, folks who are less familiar with Alaskan culture and identity might think there's an independent streak there. People move to Alaska because they will be welcomed if they don't necessarily find themselves identifying with other places in the country. So we were really interested in seeing what that sort of independent streak, how it would take form in these conversations.
That's great. Yeah, we cut across a lot of political lines that exist in other places. Marcia, do you want to try to queue up the station highlight reel so we can hear what other stations have experienced with One Small Step?
And Marcia, if it's helpful, I just emailed you links to make sure that you have access. So terrific.
All right.
Hi, everyone. So glad to have you joining us for this celebration of a very special collaboration between StoryCorps, One Small Step, and Red River Radio.
Wichita was chosen as one of only 6 communities to participate in the program.
We really appreciate getting the opportunity to share perspectives from Northeast Floridians.
When we launched the project in July, Ohioans stepped up. So far, we've had more than 300 people answer our questionnaire.
Over 400 residents of Western Pennsylvania have signed up to take part in a facilitated One Small Step conversation.
6 cities across the nation had a total of 300 people take part in these conversations, including 50 from the Shenandoah Valley to Charlottesville to Central Virginia areas. Let's take a look at what that was like.
My political values are very conservative.
You know, my parents were Democrats, and that's all I knew.
I'm just all about the freedom of all people.
So how can we come together after a divisive election this year?
That's tough. It's okay to disagree. What's not okay is the failure to communicate.
Don't you think that would be really cool if we could just find one thing that we all believe in to try to pull everybody a little closer together?
I did like that what you shared with me took an issue that I have an opinion about, and you helped me understand how you got there.
I call it ideological integrity. And when you talk about those things, I hear it in your voice.
I don't feel like you're my polar opposite. I think that I could see sitting down and having a longer conversation with you.
I hope to come down there and meet you face to face, in person.
That really means a lot to me. And I'm delighted to have met you and spoken with you.
Wouldn't it be a shame not to keep talking?
I would like that.
How are you, Maria? I'm doing great. How about you, Gail? Nice to see you again.
Kristen Wilford, welcome to our StoryCorps One Small Step Listen Together. It can be safe to still have these conversations, even with people who see things differently.
I just felt like I needed to do something positive to try to change how I was feeling about the country I love.
I think we connected because we allowed each other to be ourselves.
We've got to allow ourselves to some degree to at least feel what it's like to be in somebody else's situation.
I think it's important to understand the element of humanity in all of this. We actually have much more in common than maybe we give ourselves credit for.
You know, following this, now I've been a lot more curious about trying to understand.
What about you? What did you leave the conversation with?
That I should be doing more of what I just did.
This could be very healthy for the country.
Let's stop finger pointing. Let's stop all of this divisiveness, and let's all get on the high road and work together and make this world what we want it to be.
It was a small step, but
that's the name of it.
It was well worthwhile.
That's so cool. So Drew, you're leading these efforts with Alaska Public Media, and you're trying to encourage people to participate, and you're also facilitating these conversations. So tell us a little bit about your background and why you are attracted to helping, as you said, not lean into political divides, but try to help people talk across those divides.
Well, I debated at UAA. And so that really, I think, both spoke to and reinforced to a maybe unhealthy degree my love of talking. I think that talking is an awful lot of sort of the answer and the solution to a whole bunch of different problems. So I really loved that experience, and it motivated me to, when I got my degrees from UAA, I went to work for a consultant in town for about a year. And then, or that was just a summer. And then I moved out to DC almost right away and went to work for a lobbyist out there. And he worked on mostly Alaska issues and things. And that was a really wonderful experience. but I didn't love living in DC. And so I was excited to get back to Alaska. One of the things that did sort of teach me, though, was I worked for a lobbyist who had different political leanings than I did. But I had a tremendous amount of respect for him, continue to. He's absolutely been an important mentor in my life. And he was always really willing to entertain my different perspectives. And so I think that was a good, both of those things, working in that space, showed me a lot of value to both what the political system does and some of the, frustrations that I have with things that seem like they don't work particularly well. When I came back to Alaska, I worked in Anchorage for a year, and then I went to work for the state legislature, and I'd spent 3 sessions working in Juneau. In the last year, the first 2 years I worked for the House Majority. I went to work for them because I was really concerned with the state's fiscal situation. I'm sorry, my computer's moving around. I have an incredibly adorable puppy here that we're watching.
Show us the puppy. That's somehow
he's,
related to civic engagement, I'm sure.
Invading. So after working for the lobbyists in the legislature, I feel like I had a lot of perspective on the, federal and state politics and policy. And there's a ton to love about those jobs, but there's also a lot that's just persistently frustrating, because I really do believe that an awful lot of politics in our country is pretty much fundamentally broken. There's things that are just really not functioning and have been headed in the wrong direction since the 90s. So, not working for the legislature anymore, I came and started working for the Anchorage Home Builders Association here in town. I was their municipal lobbyist for about a year. And that was another sort of very different perspective where I got to engage with municipal government. So I've sort of had that experience at the federal, the state, and the local level. And so I care, and I think that there are a lot, I don't want to be too disparaging those systems, because I think there's a lot of things that are working right. But just persistently, and it's come up already in some of these interviews that we've done, is that there's an awful lot of people engaging in those with the assumption that the other side is the enemy. And I find that just deeply, deeply frustrating. I think because I've spent so much time around these policy spaces and everything, I tend to be really sympathetic for people that I disagree with. And I think that looking for people who have different values than you do and disagree on many issues, finding points of agreement and collaboration with those people is really virtuous. And simultaneously, people that I agree with from those part, I can be kind of ruthless about poking holes in their positions and things. And I think I can be a bit of an irritant because I think that it's really important that the only people who you should expect to hold you accountable are the people who you agree with. That when there's people from the other side trying to hold you accountable, then that's important, but that's like a really well-functioning system if that's going well. By and large, it's very easy to sell to your supporters that the people on the other side trying to hold you accountable just don't want you to be successful. And so I think that this StoryCorps program gets at the root of the people on the other side are, okay, and that you should be looking for ways that you can agree to them and ways that you can be sympathetic to their beliefs and perspectives, and maybe start to see some of those critiques of people on your own side of the fence. And so my mission is to make everybody politically grayer, I guess. And this seemed like a really good way to do it.
Paula, if I could just jump in really quick, I work with stations across the country, and it's been so unique to work with Alaska Public Media and with Drew in particular. I think that background that he just described has made him very comfortable and very conversant in issues and being in the presence of people who have differing views and differing levels of civic literacy, right? And the whole purpose of One Small Step is that you don't need to be an expert. Right? All you need to do is be an expert in the life that you've lived, and everybody is an expert in the experience that they've had. And so really people from all walks and all perspectives are very welcome here. The purpose of the conversation is not to duke it out over issues, but just to learn about one another and see each other as human beings. And what makes Drew, I think, so particularly adept at this is that he's comfortable being in spaces where people don't agree. And frankly, as you said at the top of this session, we're all in these echo chambers these days, or so many of us are, and people can feel really nervous when they come to this kind of conversation, even knowing that it's not supposed to be a debate, that it's just supposed to be friendly, get to know you, connecting conversation, they can still feel really nervous because they're talking to someone different than them. But Drew brings this energy of just ease and joy to the process that really puts our participants at ease, which I think is like such a crucial part of the experience, and why these conversations that are happening in Alaska so far have gone so absolutely beautifully.
Well, our society's kind of set up, if we have a worship group or a friend group, to keep us in our echo chambers and reinforce our beliefs. And so we actually do have to actively seek out perspectives that aren't ours nowadays, and especially if we're online, where we think everyone on Twitter must have the same opinion that we do, because the algorithm has shown us people who have the perspective we do. So with the interviews that you've done so far, Drew, any special connections made between participants that you did not expect? Do you know if any of the participants are keeping in touch?
Yeah, I think our pairs have been really beautiful so far. That it says really wonderful things about Alaskans. Some of the connections that have been made. I know that we don't, by and large, even share the participants' last names with one another, but they're also sort of in conversation with one another for an hour, and we're not trying to edit them or keep them from saying things. So yeah, the last pair that I did, both requested that they, share contact information, and they wanted to stay in touch and follow up. And so, yeah, and then Ryan and Evan both had expressed interest, and they were our first pair in staying in touch. And so that was part of why I had invited them both to be with us today.
When did One Small Step in Alaska begin? And how many signups have we had so far? What has the response been like?
The response has been really positive. I have not done much in the way of vlogging for outreach. I recorded one very brief radio spot that I think we've been running, and I reached out to a couple of local organizations, and we've had almost 200 people sign up so far, and they've come largely from the Anchorage area, but also there's been a significant minority from around the state, Homer, Soldotna, Fairbanks, a couple places in Southeast. And so one of the, silver linings of the COVID situation that we're in is that we've been doing all of the conversations we've done so far have been virtual, and we hope to do at least one or two in person if circumstances permit through the end of the year. But we started recording about a month ago. We've got 4 of the conversations recorded so far. We're looking to record 21 more conversations through the rest of this year. And yeah, I don't remember. I think I answered maybe 2 out of 3 parts of the question.
I feel like it's been covered. How do you decide how to match people together?
Oh, and you'd asked about interesting connections.
Yeah, yes.
Absolutely. It's just too cute not to share. The last conversation we had was between 2 gentlemen. One's name was Morgan, the other one was Edwin. And when one of the questions that we ask many or all of the sort of participants is one of the warm-up questions to get to know each other is, who's the most influential person in your life? And Morgan's response was his grandfather, whose name was Edwin. And that had not been in his bio going into anything. And he started tearing up when he was talking about the role that his grandfather had played in his life. And it was really like, I'd like getting emotional here now just talking about it. It was so touching that it was just this sort of serendipitous connection that I thought really helped the 2 of them just get off and going on it's not a super common name. But that was sort of just right off the bat, a connection that they made, and I think helped them sort of have a really beautiful conversation.
It's great. That's a great example. Just finding the humanness in, your participant. So once these people come together, what's the format for the conversation?
So as part of applying, and anybody who's watching now can go and apply to be matched for a conversation at alaskapublic.org/OSS. And I'm sure we can, put that into the chat and other places, and you'll hear it again before we finish. But as part of doing that, you fill out a brief questionnaire. One of the things is you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being very, very liberal and 10 being very, very conservative on both social and economic issues. And so that's a big part of the matching, is just looking for people who have different political beliefs, because that's kind of part of the idea. But you also tell us a bit about yourself. And so you write a brief bio and fill out some other, information about things that have happened in your life. And so we look for people who have at least a couple things in common that they can kind of seed a conversation from. And then I call and talk to them and sort of screen people and have a brief conversation and then look to match them. And so once you've been matched, they call in and we have them read each other's bio. And that's really the only information they've had about the other participant ahead of time. So then they could just get to meet and get to know each other. So they introduce themselves and ask each other a couple of very basic questions. One of which is that, who's been the most influential person in your life and why? And that, I think, helps. Before we bring up any sort of partisan issues, we just get to know, who are you? Who is Drew? Why am I here? Why am I talking to you? And from there, we go into, okay, what are your political beliefs? And then we ask them some questions about the sort of state of politics in the country and things like that. And throughout, I think all of our pairs have been really great about hearing things from the other person they were interested in and asking their own questions. And so I tell them time and time again that you guys are in control, you're driving. If you're interested and excited about something, that's the whole point, is to give you guys the opportunity to get interested and excited in one another. And so we try and sort of start it off on a good footing and then let them go wherever they would like. And then when there's just 5 or 10 minutes left, we give them a couple options of questions to choose from that kind of help wrap things up, reflect on the conversation they've had, and or look forward sort of into the future and where we as a community or they themselves go from here.
Jacqueline, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, people come to the table to have these conversations kind of for lots of different reasons. And some folks feel very at ease, but some folks very reasonably can feel a little bit nervous. And so, we always want to put sort of the participants' comfort and safety and like respect of their dignity and agency in the space first. And that goes for all StoryCorps conversations, but certainly One Small Step in particular. And so that's why we have some structures in place. For example, Drew as the facilitator is there the entire time, and he provides some structure. There are ground rules that the participants read ahead of time so that everyone's on the same page about what is and is not acceptable during the dialogue. Participants receive a packet ahead of time that gives them lots of information about why this, what the purpose of this initiative is, how they can best prepare to both be a great conversationalist and a great listener and partner to their conversation partner. And the participants, in addition to having these sort of suggested questions that Drew discussed, which help folks feel as if they don't have to, they're not starting from scratch. And what happens if there's dead air? There are resources available to help move them along. And Drew is there to help move them along and make sure that people are sharing the time equally. But as he said, participants are very much invited, if they need to sort of step outside the conversation and check in with Drew if they have questions about the process, or, I'm feeling a little concerned about this or that. And that doesn't happen often, but we want all of those resources and sort of safety valves to be in place in the event that, a pair starts to get into some incendiary territory. So all of these things have been well thought out in advance to ensure that participants, from wherever they're coming from, feel safe and like they're in control in the space.
That's really helpful. I'm wondering what you've been hearing so far in these conversations. What are they like?
Well, I think that this would be a perfect time, Marcia, if there was a chance you could play the EFRM reflection clip. We can hear a snapshot of one of the conversations and then ask Evan to describe a bit of his experience. This is a clip from the conversation that he had with Ryan.
Great.
For you.
Coming right up.
For you, I know you've had a little more experience with this story time kind of thing. I had never heard of it. Drew was the
first person to kind of tell me about it. So I wasn't sure really what this was. But for someone like you who kind of has already kind of known about this, was I who you expected me to be, or how was this kind of how you expected it to go?
I mean, honestly, kind of. I think it kind of seems like a little self-selective of like, if people are signing up for this, you're open for it. You're open to have this type of discussion. I mean, you personally, like, it's a pretty short bio, so I didn't have too many preconceived notions, but I think I was like pleasantly not surprised. As much as it may have been fun to have like a super bizarre, like gritty conversation, but no, this has been awesome, and I think this is kind of what I was hoping for.
Yeah, that's been really, this has been pretty cool, and it gives me a little bit of hope that we can have more of this, and kind of force people to open their eyes and see that, different interviews can be good, and we can actually come together and find out what we work on, what we agree on, and actually do something. So this has been really fun.
Awesome. I really liked what you said, and you kind of brought it up a few times of just being like, if you're a candidate, focus on what you're for versus what you're against. Or hey, if you're coming to the Young Republicans and you tell us you're not sure, like, hey, here's what we stand for, go find out what they stand for and figure out where you're at, versus, the all too easy and kind of fun, like, well, these are all the things I hate, or these are all the people who I think are stupid.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
That is fun. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah, it does. It feels good, but it's not overly effective.
Yeah. Oh.
So I'd like to bring Evan on and ask him, Evan, why did you decide to sign up for this? What appealed to you?
Right. I think a few things. I mean, I've been a fan of StoryCorps for a while, so it kind of piqued my interest right away when I heard it on the radio. And then, I mean, I definitely, kind of like a lot of people in those clips said, it's pretty clear these days that there's all these weird divides, and it's super easy to only talk to people who you already agree with. So I think this was a fun opportunity to kind of get out of that zone. And it's always just kind of interesting to chat with random folks off the street, or any way you can connect and hear their story. So and it seemed pretty straightforward, and it definitely was. And it was like Drew was saying, it was pretty funny when I heard back from Drew, and it was just like, holy cow, like little blast from the past.
So what was it feeling about talking to a stranger as opposed to maybe a friend or a family member?
I mean, I think just something new, somebody new. But I think like with lots of folks, most of my friends, and well, not all of them, but most of my friends and family, especially the ones who I interact with frequently, we share a lot of the same views and experience and ideologies. So talking to somebody who had different ideas was interesting, but also kind of like I was saying too in that recording, of talking to somebody who I know who is also interested in hearing and sharing other ideas too.
Sure.
If I could jump in there, one of the things that I've been struck by is how much our participants have seemed like they wanted to get along right from the get-go. I think that I somewhat expected people to feel a little bit more uncertain. But I think that what Evan's talking about with, the sort of presumption that that your conversation partner is sort of wants to be engaged in the same activity of talking to someone with a different perspective, really helps to take down some of those barriers of like, what's their motivation and why are they here? And so I think that has been really helpful, and it's a pity we can't sort of broadcast that a little bit more, or I don't know, like give people that same sort of cause to expect that the person that they're talking to, while maybe not in agreement with them on everything, is like someone who wants this to be a good experience and go well. I think that it can be really tough to bear your, you know, your motivations and what your beliefs are to someone who might critique them, or someone who might get mad, because being mad is kind of scary. And I think that everybody comes into this with the sort of the assumption that I can kind of say whatever as long as I'm just representing myself, and it's not going to make the other person mad. And so, yeah, just from the get-go, these have been almost collaborative efforts where Evan and Ryan kind of started off almost talking about like, how could we fix this? And it was like, oh, that's lovely. If Democrats or Republicans could only come together more often and have the first thing they talk about be how can we fix this? That would be a beautiful thing.
And libertarians are over here saying, don't forget about us. So Evan, did the experience, how did it compare to what you anticipated?
I mean, it was very comfortable. I think the facilitation was, I mean, it was pretty lightweight, but it definitely helped kind of keep things going. And it didn't require a ton of commitment, you know, on my behalf or preparation. But it was it was interesting. I learned some new things, you know, actually about, you know, how things operate in Anchorage or UAA. And then it was just fun to kind of chat with Ryan. I mean, it was super duper friendly. There was no disagreement. I think it was just kind of like, it was mostly fun and interesting. And I think the timing is also really good right now. You know, everybody's on more Zoom calls than they would like, but this was kind of a fun way to connect with other folks who it's harder to do that in this day and age. So that was a nice aspect of it for sure.
Great. So Drew, what stood out to you about the conversation that Ryan and Evan had?
I don't know. I think that it's tough for me to say because I had not seen Evan for years, but you know, I did know him growing up some, and I think that speaks a lot to somebody's background. Kind of the storytelling aspect of this is about you know, what are the events and sort of things that happened to you that helped shaped who you are today and where you're coming from. And so I had recruited Ryan specifically to do this because I have had a lot of political conversations with him and know that he's someone who I disagree with about a whole bunch of things, but always enjoy talking to. And so I picked them because I was really optimistic that this would be that this one would go just the way it was supposed to. And so I guess if anything, I was struck by how easy it was. Evan said that the facilitation was pretty lightweight. I literally didn't open my mouth while the recording was running. I was silent the entire time. I used the chat to just like put up the next question that for them to get around to when they got around to it. But they self-managed time. They managed all the transitions between questions. It was incredibly easy. So I guess that what has struck me about their conversation most was sort of how much it represented just how easy this all can be and how much sort of fun it was. It was a really positive experience. I got done with it and I had kept wanting to, part of why I didn't open my mouth was because I kept wanting to engage in the conversation. And I wasn't really supposed to. As the facilitator, I'm there to help sort of create the space for the conversation, but the conversation is between the participants. It's not between the participants and me. And so they were talking about all this stuff that gets me really excited. And so I just wanted to like get in there and be one of the guys having the conversation about how do we sort of move forward and do a better job. So I loved listening to their conversation, but it was also like, it was exactly what I'd hoped it would be.
If I may, Paula, I was also in the space and would love to comment briefly. I want to acknowledge what Drew just said, that it can be so tempting. I've worked at StoryCorps for a number of years and I've facilitated hundreds of conversations. And it can be so tempting when you hear conversation partners dialoguing to just want to jump in because you hear some really remarkable things in these spaces. But it's so important, particularly in the context of One Small Step recordings, for the facilitator to sort of remain neutral and to create an environment that is hospitable to people regardless of what beliefs they hold, within reason. And so that can be really challenging, but it's a really important part of the process, that we want participants to feel welcome and not as if the facilitator is an arbiter and a judge of who wins and who loses, because these, again, are not debates. They're just meant to be opportunities for people who wouldn't necessarily cross paths and discuss politics to come together and touch enough on their politics to sort of experience their differences, but not get stuck there, and to be able to kind of get to know each other in a more robust and holistic way. And what struck me about Evan and Ryan's conversation, just to put it slightly differently than how Drew described it, because I agree, it was remarkable how easily it flowed, but that really speaks to the importance of bringing curiosity to the table and bringing curiosity about who it is that you're going to meet. I think if people are considering participating in this, they want to come to the table and they want to take part because they believe in the mission of the project, the single most important thing you can do is bring an open mind and really listen to your partner and follow up and ask questions and affirm and engage. And both Evan and Ryan, I think, were very naturally inclined to want to do that, to ask those follow-up questions and respond positively and supportively and dig in, which is what made it such a great conversation and what made it such an easy job for Drew. I was also excited and cheering in the wings.
So Evan, have you reflected on your conversation since then, and would you encourage others to sign up for One Small Step?
I would definitely encourage other folks to sign up. I mean, it's easy peasy, and it's a lot of fun. I think in terms of reflecting, I mean, to be honest, I haven't reflected a ton because it was so easy and it was just kind of another conversation. But I mean, I think it is interesting to think a little bit more about how you can create these circumstances where folks can connect over whatever it may be, some shared interest or some shared, desire that they have. And I think, it's not easy to do. So other than sort of evangelizing, this and encouraging folks to sign up, I haven't had too many specific thoughts or ideas since then.
Okay. So Drew, tell us again, how do people sign up?
You can go to www.alaskapublic.org/OSS. And I just put that into the chat also, for people to see.
So you were a UAA student, and a lot of the people who are listening to this are UAA students. What would you say to UAA students? Is there something that's appealing perhaps to UAA students about this whole process?
Well, I would happily encourage your professors to give you some extra credit for signing up and participating in the conversation. I know that was a big motivator when I was at UAA for things. But in all seriousness, we've had a number of relatively young people signing up. I think relative to a lot of various voter demographic type things. But looking at our, the age of our signups, we don't have many people in the sort of 18 to 25 bracket. And so I think that you guys as students have incredibly important voices. You are the future of our communities. And I also know that, at least in terms of my political involvement, one of the reasons why I debated at UAA was because I had already sort of started getting involved in policy and political stuff. I was a big environmental sort of conservation advocate, as starting in high school. And my entree into politics was very not even partisan, because it was really more environmental and issue based, but I was a warrior fighting for what I believed in. And I think that is really essential and important, but especially for those sort of folks, I'd encourage you to look for opportunities, if not through One Small Step, to have these types of conversations where you aren't sort of fighting for what you believe in, where you are fighting to learn about the people who disagree with you. And that doesn't mean that you need to hold your own beliefs any less tightly, but that it's always valuable to understand where other people are coming from. And so, but they can be really hard to sort of create those opportunities on your own. And so this is one sort of opportunity for that. And yeah, I think that it being with strangers is sometimes also helpful. I think when there are people who are important to us, like family members who believe differently than we do on things that are really core to our identity and that we think are of great moral significance, it can be like all the more deeply uncomfortable to disagree with those people. And maybe talking to a stranger, it's a little bit easier to sort of see the good in what they're saying, and the parts that they, you disagree with, just kind of let that go. It can be a lot harder to let go of something that a sibling or a parent believes. And so I think that this is a great opportunity to practice, and that if not through One Small Step, then to have those kind of conversations with other people, to look for. And there was one of the reasons I really enjoyed Ryan's perspective, because he's somebody who has been doing this sort of thing for a long time. He was the president of the College Republicans when he was at UAA. And one of the things that Evan referenced in that clip was that he said that, as the college Republicans and the college Democrats would almost collaborate to do events and things. And it was just like, well, you shouldn't be involved in elections. And we all believe that. And, you should come and talk to our group. And if you like what we're saying, then great, like sign up. If you disagree, like, don't, just yell at us or anything. Just go right over there. There's the Democrats. They have a set of very different beliefs, and you can talk to them and get engaged through them. And that kind of pro-engagement, pro-talking about things, pro-dealing with things approach is, I think, incredibly valuable. So yeah,
Okay.
I rambled a bit, but that's my thoughts.
I will say as well, it's not uncommon for the folks who sort of take the first step to want to participate in this to be a little bit older. And we often hear feedback from older folks saying, I'd really love to talk to someone a lot younger just to get their perspective. Like, my news source says that these young people are these insane, revolutionary, et cetera, et cetera. Are they really like that? It's sort of a joke, but it's true. Like, I think the older generation is really interested to have conversations with younger folks who bring new perspectives. And so if you're a student and you're interested, you don't need to be an expert again. It's just a way for you to meet a community member, have a great conversation, and you'll be in excellent hands with Drew, who puts everybody at ease in the space. So really encouraging students to come out if they'd like to sign up. And Drew mentioned, having conversations with people in your own life. It can be a lot easier to talk to a stranger where you don't bring that baggage of them being, around the Thanksgiving table. But if you are interested in talking to someone from your own life, you can suggest that they participate in One Small Step, and you can record with Alaska Public Media together. I'm actually also going to drop into the chat here a link to a do-it-yourself conversation guide that StoryCorps provides. So if you're interested in trying it out on your own with a friend or with someone else from your life, this is a guide that kind of gives you a sense of what StoryCorps conversations are like and walks you through the process of having a One Small Step conversation on your own. But I am, just for good measure, going to drop the link to sign up through Alaska Public Media in the chat one more time so that everybody has access, because we'd really love for folks to come out and sign up.
Well, definitely with younger people, they also, can think of older people as one group, like one dimensional people, right? The whole okay boomer phenomenon was all about that. So it'd be great to see some cross-generational dialogue going on. I'd love that. I would like to ask Evan one other thing before we leave today, and that's that this whole thing is called One Small Step. Are you thinking about what might be the next step for you, or what it might mean, like, long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, just trying to seek out this type of conversation more and be kind of actively curious and kind of ask more questions than you kind of lead with questions instead of leading with ideas or beliefs. In terms of actual kind of concrete next steps, still TBD.
Okay. And Drew, what are the next steps for One Small Step in Alaska?
Well, Jacqueline's here in Alaska visiting, and so she is, she talked a little bit about the hubs around the country that have started up, and so there's two things that we, talked about while she was here. One is the signups process. I mentioned that I've been calling folks to schedule, and I think that we're going to transition to a more digital scheduling mechanism. And so hopefully start doing these conversations a little bit more frequently. And we're looking at doing them on Fridays and Saturday mornings, so that there's a couple of time options for people. And we are hoping to do at least a couple of them in person. So we have some physical kits, and the Zoom has been a really, powerful and awesome tool. And I'm excited to get people from across the state talking to each other, not just from the Anchorage area. Our last conversation involved a state trooper from Wasilla talking with an archaeologist from Anchorage. And so, yeah, a couple in-person conversations happening a little bit more regularly and a bit more predictable times throughout the day on Friday and then Saturday AM. And then in early December, we'll be having a listening event. And so we should have, 20 or 25 conversations recorded by then. And we'll have some of them sort of trimmed down a little bit, and then we'll have opportunity to sort of come together as a community and listen to some of these One Small Step conversations that have been had.
Great, I'm looking forward to that. Marcia, do you want to end on the golden rule video and wrap things up for today with that?
Golden rule? No. Do you mean the loyal opposition one?
Sure. Let's do.
Oh, the golden one that we did
That
tonight.
I
Yep.
sent you, Marcia.
Gotcha. I forgot it didn't work earlier.
I think we have the YouTube too that Eamon put in the chat.
I got it here. Here we go.
I noticed you with the hat, and I noticed that you were surrounded by some people, and I noticed that they were being kind of threatening, and then somebody snatched your hat off your head. And that's the point where something kind of snapped inside me because I wear a Muslim hijab, and I've been in situations where people have tried to snatch it off my head.
Wow.
And I rushed towards you and I just started screaming, "Leave him alone, give me that back."
I don't think we could be any further apart as people. And yet it was just kind of like this common, that's not okay moment. You are genuinely the only Muslim person I know. It's not that I've actively avoided, it's just, I've just never been in the position where I can interact for an extended period of time. So I guess my views on the Muslim community have been influenced by a lot of the news articles and things of that nature.
I feel like a lot of times in the media, you don't see the normal Muslim, the one that listens to classic rock like I do. You don't meet that Muslim.
Can you tell me about where you grew up? What was that part of your life like?
So I was born in Baghdad, in Iraq. I moved to the US when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
Being a Muslim girl, I stood out in almost every single way that you can in middle school, the worst time to stand out. What about you? How was it like when you grew up?
I was homeschooled. So it was a vastly different experience socially. I didn't have, I guess, as many friends as most people would. I only went to public school 1 year of my life, and I got in 3 fights and I lost all of them. I actually lost a lot of friends because of the selection, because of my political stance. So I hope that I can be the reason that someone decides to talk to someone as opposed to just cutting them out of their life or blocking them on Twitter,
I'd like for this to encourage other people to engage in more conversations with people that you don't agree with.
That's what it's all about. I'm so glad I wasn't the only one who felt like that.
great. Thank you so much to Jacqueline, to Drew, to Evan, to Marcia today for your involvement and participation. And we hope to see your name as one of those people who signs up for One Small Step.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for
Have
having
a
us.
great weekend.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.